The recording. Hello.
And I hope the volume levels are okay. Yeah.
I think so, yeah. You can hear me okay, right?
Yeah.
Great. Excellent. Yeah. Well, hello and welcome, Ade, to my platform.
A pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for joining me. When I started, or rather when I decided to be active on YouTube, I decided to name it the ESCI channel, which is acronym for Engage, Share, Connect, Inform, and Empower. And I have a feeling that we're probably going to touch on all of those in this session.
Or none, of course.
Well, let's see how it pans out. But some of you may know I had the privilege of interviewing Ade in Butterfly magazine. And never in the history of Butterfly magazine have we had an article that spanned 3 issues, but such is the width and breadth of what this young man has to share. And so I remember when I told my editor-in-chief that I'd done so many thousand words and that it wasn't actually going to fit into one article. She was having a minor heart attack, but somehow we accommodated, and I will try and include the links below in this recording so that those of you who haven't managed to see to read the article can actually read it. Let me just see if I can share my screen so you can see what it looks like. So hopefully, there we have it.
Scary.
So this was the front cover for issue 21, which came out on September the 11th. And of course, the second part came out last week, and the final part came out this weekend. So you've got issues 21, 22, and 23 for your entertainment. Do make sure you catch it. But yeah, such was the rich content of the conversations we were having. I think I decided that it couldn't all be contained in one article, and we had to take it off to a different platform, and hence our interview today. So Ade, once again, thank you so much really for making your time, making yourself available. Where do I start?
I was going to say thank you for inviting me. We could have invited lots more interesting people, but I'm grateful.
We'll let the viewers be the judge of that. So where do I start? Ade, the writer, the broadcaster, historian, editor, poet, social commentator, motivational speaker, media trainer. I mean, the list goes on. So rather than make a feeble attempt to introduce you to the world at large, Ade, over to you. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing today?
Yes, I mean, I'm somebody who, I grew up in Sierra Leone, had what I tend to call my formative years in Sierra Leone. And I use that phrase quite deliberately because I think pretty much my worldview was formed by the fact that I grew up in Sierra Leone between 1960 and 1970, from the age of 5 to 15. The kind of arrogance of youth, by the time I left Sierra Leone to go to the UK at 15, I thought I knew it all, and that there was nothing the UK or the world could teach me. Then subsequently studied, and then a career in journalism. But my interests, as you've indicated at the intro there, they're broad, they're wide, have lots and lots of things that I love: sports, music, politics, history, architecture, the arts of various types, really. And yes, it's broad and wide. Grew up in a family where, parents, I thank them every day for the kind of upbringing that we had, because I was always conscious that it was different compared to that of my friends. So it's formed the person that I am today. I'm currently in the Gambia. I'm head of news and current affairs at a TV station, the most watched TV station in the Gambia, QTV. But that's a kind of potted history, really. We can delve into individual aspects of it, but that's a kind of brief summary of who I am. Yeah.
Very good. Well, I'm glad you ended with the QTV aspect there, because I came quite late to the party when it comes to SLTV.
Right.
So, of course, you shared a link with me recently, and I literally had a hand-on head moment thinking, how is it that I was not aware of SLTV, which stands for Sierra
Yes.
Leone TV,
Right.
one of Ade's many brain children, I should say. Ade, just please give us a little bit of background. I mean, I know that it's now no longer in
Yes.
existence.
Sure.
How did it come about?
Yes.
When did it span from to, and what's happening
Sure,
now?
sure. I mean, just a point of correction. Wasn't my brainchild as such, but I was in at the kind of early stages of it. My friend, colleague, business partner, Mo Usman Kamara, who's now in Freetown, is the one who actually between us came up with the idea, because we felt that the Nigerian community, the Ghanaian community, to some extent, had programs that were dedicated to them on the likes of Ben TV and so on. And we felt that the Sierra Leone community, large as it was in the UK, wasn't get what we deemed quality stuff. And so we wanted to reflect that in some things. It wasn't going to be gossipy and tittle tattle, but informative stuff and edifying stuff that we could present in a quality way. And that's what we sought to do. So, we wanted to highlight, for example, people would come, the president would come, ministers would come and go, and nobody would know what they did or even that they were in the country, apart from they might have heard the odd rumor. So what we tried to do was every time somebody of that stature came, we would try and interview them. And I then did a program on SLTV called Ade in the Community. And essentially, it was us kind of reaching out to the community and say, these people are coming here, supposedly representing your interests, and they've come and they've gone, and you might want to know what exactly they came to do. And so we were asking the questions that we felt Sierra Leoneans might want to know in the UK about the people who were in government or in positions of power. And so that was it. But there was also entertainment as well. So, singers, artists would come and we would interview them as well, because obviously that's a huge part of our culture. So it wasn't any kind of highfalutin thing or anything. Neither did it kind of dumb down. We didn't sort of talk down to our audience or use sort of bombastic phrases when we did speak to people, no matter who they were or how important, in quotes, they were. So it was about being informative for our community, and we tried to do that. And to an extent, we succeeded. Yeah.
When did it start?
Gosh, now you're really taking me back. I would say around 1998, somewhere like that. So it was a while ago. It was a while ago, because I was kind of racking my brain, because I think Ernest Koroma came into power in, was it 97 or 2007?
Ernest
Because
Caramel's
it was
2007, wasn't it?
2007. So it would have been around 2007, 2008, let me correct myself, because it was just before and during his tenure. So, we started by talking to people like the High Commissioner in London. And yeah, so you had people like Chaluba, the late Mr. Chaluba, who was our High Commissioner, people like that. We would interview him and so on. And it ran in its proper way, I guess, from 2007 to maybe 2012, maybe just, 2012, 13. We wanted to take it to a whole different level, actually, like make it 100 times better than it was. I mean, those who find the link might think it was good, but honestly, the plans we had for it around the time of Ebola, for example, which should have been ideal for us to have still been going then. But, everybody else had other interests and so on. And like many Black businesses, there's always a struggle to get advertisers. And so that was a point. And we all had jobs. So this was being done in addition to our jobs. And I can tell you, there were times when I would leave my main job at 5 or 6 o'clock, and I would be in the studios editing some of the programs till 1 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And as I said, we weren't getting paid by anybody. We were doing it because we felt we were doing a community service.
Yeah. And it was a small complement of staff. I mean, so it was just yourself and Mo.
myself and Mo.
That
That was it. From time to time, we would bring other people on board if we had a special program that we were recording. But it was myself and Mo. It was myself and Mo, and Mo did all the work, and I just sort of stood in front of the camera and pretended to know what I was talking about. But,
yeah. Was Mo
it was
based?
just the two of us in a sense.
And was he based here
But,
at the time or in Sierra Leone?
he was based here. He's only just relocated. He relocated to Sierra Leone about the same time I moved to the Gambia. And at one point, I mean, what kind of made us go in slightly divergent paths was that we were going to start a TV channel in Sierra Leone, because although they have certain TV channels there, if I might upset a few people, but I don't think any of them are what I would call quality. Even the ones that are the most watched, I won't name them, but they're not my idea of quality. I know they and others think otherwise, and we wanted to actually bring something and say, actually, there are Sierra Leoneans who can bring stuff of a much higher quality than you're getting. Don't settle for less than the best, and that really was the aspiration. But as I said, we both had different jobs, so which kind of took up most of our time.
Yeah, understood. And I think there's a lot to be said for those of us in the diaspora who obviously have a strong connection with Africa, and clearly have experience, living, working, say, both on the continent and here in the UK. That brings that added value, if you like. And so, with that said, you could see why it had all the ingredients to be a success. And it's just unfortunate, like you say, with the challenges of getting sponsorship and getting additional people on board, that sadly it's run its course. I have to say, it's a source of sadness to me, because I clearly came to the party late. But
no, it might come again, because we have a company called SL Media, as in ESSELLE, which of course is SL spelled out. That we've never given up on the dream. Actually, we've never given up on the dream, and so we may very well revive it, and certainly that's the ambition. I think these days of interconnectedness, you and I are speaking via Zoom, for example. And working in the UK, of course, we're used to using the likes of Zoom, but now the whole world has discovered or rediscovered Zoom and is using it. So it means that we don't have to necessarily be in the same country for us to do programs. I could do programs here in the Gambia, for example, for SL Media. There's a huge Sierra Leonean contingent here, and many people aren't even aware of what they do, and yet they've brought things like lantern and hunting and all those things to Gambia. And in some ways, they're even more vibrant here than they are in Sierra Leone.
Can we just explain? Sorry, can we just explain for the, uninitiated, who may not understand,
the uninitiated.
And what's the other one?
So a lantern. I mean, lantern is, literally people build these floats. And they depict various scenes. Traditionally, it would come at the end of Ramadan, and in Sierra Leone, and you have what they call watch night or watch net, where they would parade and be awarded prizes for the best, either the best lit or the best designed. We called them lanterns, but they were essentially floats that had, and they were called lanterns because you had lighting in them to illuminate whatever you were depicting.
Like a grand hunt of sorts, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And then you had the hunting. Literally, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's the hunting society, to give it its full name. And these are people who were hunters. But of course, now the ones you see, they kind of dance around in the streets with World War I rifles that probably don't even work and probably wouldn't scare any animals. And they have almost a whole language that they speak. A lot of it is Yoruba. A lot of the songs and so on are Yoruba, which tells you where the culture originated, So that's still quite vibrant here I wouldn't say throughout Gambia, but certainly in Banjul, it's very strong. And you go to Banjul, unlike elsewhere in the Gambia, it would not be unusual to hear people speaking Creole that sounds just like Freetonian Creole. People here call it Aku, but
Yeah.
it's what you and I know as Creole, or what most people know as Creole, and it's identical. Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. I mean, I just want to go back briefly to, one of the highlights on SLTV. So I think that clip that I looked at was the Economic Forum of 2009.
2009, yes.
Where you spoke to some fairly notable, leaders in our community, both here and abroad.
Sure.
The former presidents, for instance, Ernest Bai Koroma and Tony Blair, among other people. And I remember my mum watching it, and she was quite taken with it. And the first thing she said was, "So what happened? What was the outcome? Did they get anywhere? What were the results?"
Yeah.
I have a feeling, I have a sneaky suspicion that we didn't quite hit the mark and tick all the boxes. But I mean, what was your estimation?
Yes, I mean, yes, I think watching it, as you rightly say, there was a lot of enthusiasm and optimism over it, like real optimism. And we were all buoyed by that and swept along with it. Tony Blair was there, Prince Charles was there. In fact, in the meeting, the kind of one-to-one meeting with Prince Charles and Ernest Koroma, the only people allowed in the room were myself, Mo, and the president's photographer. Nobody else was allowed in.
Wow.
And we have the film, we have the footage of that still. But onto the conference itself, investment forum it was really. They were trying to say to people, Sierra Leone is a good destination to go and invest because there are lots of opportunities. And, anybody who knows Sierra Leone, we should not still be talking about its great potential. It should have realized that potential a long time ago because of the assets it has, gold, bauxite, iron ore, diamonds, of course, and even platinum. At one point, it was one of the few places in the world where you could get platinum. What all happened to that? What happened to all of that? So, that is the kind of thing. And so that optimism, and of course, Sierra Leone being Sierra Leone, all the people who were swept up with the optimism, they went there, and some of them were scammed. Some of them, people tried to rip them off. And in some cases, government people asked them for bribes, let's be blunt, and they were like, no, we're not interested. We're here to help you to start businesses that will create jobs. We're not going to bribe you on top of that. And so it ebbed away, and those people ebbed away and thought, what, let's go somewhere else where somebody's not going to ask us for a bribe. Even when we're going to create opportunity. And that's what happened to it in a nutshell. Great optimism, great expectations, but they really were never fulfilled.
It saddens me. I mean, what you're saying doesn't surprise me, being of Sierra Leonean heritage myself. And on the one hand, yes, one can understand the concept of survival and why that would be the easiest option for most. Yeah. But, when you look at other African countries, Ade, as you well know, the likes of Ghana, the likes of Rwanda, to name but a few, that are at least trying. They're not perfect, but I think they have made some serious inroads in terms of their country's prosperity and success. What do you think, in your view, is the mindset with Sierra Leone that tends to lead us down that path? It's a very short-termist approach, clearly, that they take, and why is it? I'm wondering that they can't see.
Yes, I mean, I think you've nailed it. I mean, the word is mindset. The country I always use every single time is, of course, Cape Verde. Cape Verde is a country off the coast of West Africa with a population of 540,000, and yet it has 6 universities. It has the highest literacy rate in Africa. It's the only official world-ranked middle-income country in West or Central Africa. They've only been independent since 1975, and yet when you go there and you see the mindset of the people, you see, Amilcar Cabral, who led both Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau to independence in the fight. It was a bitter fight over 10 years against the Portuguese. I mean, he said something which really still resonates with me. He was asked, why are you making such a big deal about education? Because in the space of about 4 years, in the areas they had captured in Guinea-Bissau, they built more schools than the 200 years than the schools that had been built in the 200 years the Portuguese had ruled the place, and it was ridiculous. And he said, because that day when we take over, we have to be in a position to be in charge of our own destiny. because guess what? The Portuguese and all the other naysayers will be saying, you see, they can't take care of themselves. We have to be in that position to take care of ourselves and never look back and never regret it. That's why they push and push and they push education. Successive governments have come and they've pushed that agenda and they've pushed that message. Very proud people. They've achieved things that for the rest of West Africa, for most of Africa, are unimaginable. They're on a whole different level. You go there, you think you're on a different planet, never mind a different continent. And it's all about the mindset. Everybody there is focused and they teach it from the day you go to school. One of the first things that amaze me when you go to these kindergartens, there are kids 5 years old. And one of the things they tell them first day is that, never throw litter in the streets. And so nobody throws litter in the streets. Your food can fall on the street in Cape Verde. You'd pick it up and eat it without thinking twice, or on the pavement there, because they're so clean. And that sort of permeates through to how
from an early age.
This is it. And so when you go to the schools and you go to the universities, you see the sort of emphasis that they've put in education. And for me, one of the things that was really heartening was to see the sheer number who had returned, having studied abroad. And I say returned because some of them who were about 20 and 25, they weren't even born there. But all of them said that from the minute they could walk and talk, their parents always brought them back to Cape Verde and told them, you're not Italian, you're not Spanish, you're not Portuguese, you may have been born in those countries, you're Cape Verdean. And that's the mentality they grew up with. Yeah. And so honestly, when I talk about it, people think it's a kind of utopia. And I say, don't take my word for it. Go there and find out for yourself.
Yeah. But this is the thing though, Ade. I mean, as you know, Sierra Leone for a long time, or at least Freetown, was referred to as the Athens of Africa. There was a time when we were the ones that attracted, people from across the continent, from Nigeria, from, most of the other African countries. It was all about the education. Frabe College, located in a rather beautiful part of the capital, was the seat of learning. It was affiliated to the University of Durham. My mother to this day proudly speaks about, when you get your certificates from Frabe College, it would have the University of Durham at the top.
Absolutely.
We were doing it. We were pioneers in our field at one time. What on earth happened?
We were, and it's quite amazing because the question you have just asked me, somebody asked me yesterday. So in a funny way, I've been able to rehearse my answer, and I'll tell you what I told him yesterday. And it's remarkable because it was exactly the same thing. We were discussing this whole thing about the Athens of Africa and so on. And I said, the change, one can pinpoint it to a certain mindset where we stopped thinking that we wanted our society to be a meritocracy. People started getting appointed to positions based on who they knew rather than what they knew and what they had studied. And once that crept in, because, Africa, unlike a lot of places in Europe, we put more store by family than we do by in nationhood. And so, making sure you, your family, and the people from your town or village are all right is a big deal. And so people would appoint people who came from the same area, from the same, might even have come from the same extended family. And those people started getting jobs over people who actually had the qualifications. And that really was when the rot set in. So from about 1970, early 70s, 72, 73 onwards, you started to see more and more of that. People complained about it. They couldn't do anything about it because, the government of the day actually kind of put down such complaints, and people started drifting to other countries. So you'd go to Ghana, you go to Gambia. There was a time when you could come to Gambia, no exaggeration, in the best schools in the Gambia, 80% of the teachers were from Sierra Leone, 80%. Wow. I mean, and, it's not as if Gambia was some sort of, it wasn't America or the United Kingdom, and so that started, once that became embedded, where that was the culture, that it didn't matter. And then people started cheating in exams. People started paying for that. And in my answer yesterday, I gave this example. I won't name the guy, although he's passed on, but he was my classmate when I was at Christ the King College in Bow. At one point, he was punished for some minor infringement in school. It was a mainly boarding school, 99% boarders. And his punishment was to go and clean the teacher's common room. And he saw the end of term exam papers and he stole them, took them to Bowtown and had them Xeroxed, as you did in those days.
That means photocopy, right?
Photocopy, because there weren't photocopiers, weren't even, but the equivalent of a photocopier, and he brought them back proudly to show us that he had. And I can tell you this, I was the only person in his class who would even speak to him. He was shunned for the rest of the year. Nobody even looked at those papers. We wanted to get our results by the sweat of our brow.
That was the integrity back then.
That was the integrity. If it happened now, he would be a hero. People would buy the papers off him and they would be saying what a great guy he was. That was the change. I'm talking about 68, 69 that I'm talking about. And so that was still the culture, not just at CKC, Christ the King College, that was across the nation in many, in Moyamba, in Magorka, Kenema, in Freetown, of course. That was the mentality, but that changed and that has harmed the nation ever since.
I can attest to that. I mean, you and I are one of the fortunate ones who schooled in Sierra Leone, in Freetown. I went there when I was 5 and did part of my primary schooling there and part of my secondary schooling there as well. I should say all of my primary schooling. And I know for a fact that the education that I got in Sierra Leone between, those were my formative years, between 5 and 15. They stand me in good stead. And had it not been for me grasping those basics, when it comes to English grammar, for instance, even French, a foreign language. I remember when I came and started high school here, I was streets ahead of my contemporaries in class. And of course, they couldn't understand it, Simone from Africa, how is that possible? And I'm just so nostalgic when it comes to Sierra Leone. So when I hear about these stories about not just bribes, I mean, I hear about young girls in the schools these days sleeping with their teachers.
That's it.
To get the grades.
Yeah.
When I found out about that a few years ago, I immediately went into disbelief, I have to say.
Well, I was just going to ask whether you actually listened to my conversation with this guy yesterday, because I swear this was one of the things I related to him, because some friends of mine who had left Sierra Leone because of the war, they've come to London, and about 10 of them were in my house, and I was making coffee sort of back and forth between the kitchen and the sitting room. And I just heard some of them saying, oh, she was such a stupid girl, and yeah, all of them were kind of pitching in, arguing. I said, who's this person that you're all talking about? And they named this girl who had been at FBC with them. And the reason she was stupid was because even though she was the brightest in the class, she got failed because she refused to sleep with the lecturer.
Wow.
And I swear, they thought she was stupid. And I said, no, this is somebody who has high morals that you should be proud of. But honestly, they thought she was stupid for not just opening her legs for the lecturer. And they just thought that this is what you do. That really saddened me. And I'm not exaggerating. When they left, I sat in my flat and I switched the lights off and I just sat in quiet contemplation for about 2 hours to let this thing sink and wash over me. It was so depressing that they thought that was normal. Horrible, terrible. Yeah, how did we get to that? Yeah, but that was what became of the country.
I think, I don't want to digress too much, but I think something happened to the fabric of Sierra Leone society with the civil wars. I remember when I, traveled, so I came back in 87 and then I didn't go back until 2009, I think. So way after, the civil wars and things had settled. And of course, I met up with some former school friends and they were trying to explain to me about how, mentally and emotionally, I guess, psychologically, a lot of Sierra Leoneans experience some kind of shift.
Sure.
And I think that's kind of permeated into the educational system, political life, and people's morals.
Oh, yes, I mean, very much. I went back and I was quite horrified at some of the things when I went to do a BBC radio documentary about Sierra Leone, where people told me about things that had happened during the war and because of the war. in terms of morals, really. But the rot had set in before the war. It just accelerated. It accelerated as a result of the war, for sure. For sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, before sorry, I'm like a dog with a bone when it comes to SLA. I will make a final impassioned plea to revive it. I think even though things are not quite where we want them to be with Sierra Leone, I think there's still, positive stories that can be reported. There are other issues that, one can be looking at. And I mean, in whatever
I think
it can be resurrected.
I was going to say, I think you're pushing at an open door here, because I think we do want to resurrect it. And, that I've been posting lots and lots of stuff on Facebook in the last 3 weeks about kind of historical photographs to do with Sierra Leone mainly, although some of them are to do with Africa broadly. And it's been, the reaction has been remarkable. I mean, those photographs that I've posted, maybe 100 photographs, have had something like 2,000 to 3,000 comments in the space. And that's quite astonishing. But the thing is, when you tell people about these things, they're aghast. They say, this happened in Sierra Leone in 1954, in 1938, or I mean, there's a photograph of Ella Koblo Gulama when she went to London to do a conference in 1948. People kept asking me, are you sure this photograph was taken in 1948?
Can you just remind me, was she the first female?
She's the first female cabinet minister in sub-Saharan Africa. And she was made that in Sierra Leone. She herself was a chief, and she was also married to a chief by Koblo. Brilliant woman, somebody who was one of the shining lights of Sierra Leone politics in that kind of immediate post-independent era, and a legend. I mean, I say that without any hyperbole. And here she was in 1948, attending a conference in London, which was organized by people from Commonwealth countries. And these were all people who were councillors and in the biggest cities or towns in various. And it's quite interesting, because for all the years I've been looking at those photographs, it's only when people started commenting on the one that Ella Koblo is in that I looked at another of the photographs. And one of the people in there is actually Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, who went on to be Nigeria's first prime minister. He's actually there in 1948 in London at this conference. I'd never even looked at the picture closely enough to actually realize that he was there.
And this is the beauty of documenting, either visually or, it could be moving images by video or, pictorial, because it's revisiting it, and it's, by rehearsing whatever it is, that you start to realize that actually there was so much more than met the eye initially.
Yes.
I was just going to say, go on.
I was just going to say, one of the things that surprised me when I posted stuff was that people didn't realize that all the Anglican bishops used to come to London to be consecrated, including my great-grandfather, Bishop T.S. Johnson. He was consecrated in London. And somebody said, oh, you mean they came all the way from Sierra Leone to London? I said, yes. And so I posted several pictures of various bishops who had come to be consecrated either in London or Canterbury, as the case may be. So
And this is the thing, you see, I think it's incumbent on us, those of us here in the diaspora who are, relatively privileged compared to others, to keep that history alive. We talk about so many pioneering facts there just now. You mentioned the first female cabinet minister. And I remember when we were doing the interview for Butterfly magazine, this is a fact that I hadn't even been aware of, guys. And it was such an education talking to Ade. We touched on the female vote, suffragettes. And of course, you pointed out to me that that was something that had long since started in Sierra Leone. Before
1792.
to be precise. Got going in, what was it, 1901 or 19...
Exactly. I mean, the suffragettes in 2018, the suffragettes were celebrating 100 years.
That's it. There you
go. So imagine in 1792, because of course the people who founded Freetown had come out of slavery, and so they wanted a society of equality, and that's why they allowed in their constitution that women could also have the vote. They wanted there to be that equality, and it's so far thinking that nowadays you think of it, and people used to argue the point with me, and then of course typical.
Are you there, Ade? Seem to have lost you. Can you hear me? Ade? I'm not sure what's happened. Just give it a few moments. There's probably something going on with the connection. There
Sorry.
you are.
Yes, I'm back. I was just saying.
I'm not sure what happened there.
But I think it's the Wi-Fi. It's trying to it's back on, it says. I don't know why. I didn't tell it to go off, I promise. But I was talking about the vote 1792 and the kind of society and equal society that they were trying to promote. And as I said, just before I kind of lost you there, that when I used to mention it, people would say, oh, are you sure? And then Simon Sharma, in his book, Rough Crossings, mentions it. He gives it quite a mention over a couple of pages, saying that, this was the first place in the world where women had the vote. And since then, of course, now it gets repeated and kind of regurgitated everywhere. But it's, because it's been validated by Simon Sharma, of course, so it's all right to mention it now. But many first, and of course, first country in the world to produce self-adhesive postage stamps. And what's even more remarkable when you look at it, I think I think they're called something Jones and Co., the company that won the contract. The fact that any government anywhere in the world could put out a tender saying, we would like to produce self-adhesive postage stamps. Where the hell did that come from?
Imagine that
back then in 1964. This was 2 years before America, because when America tried it, it didn't work. They had to abandon it for another 10 years. Sierra Leone never had to abandon it. February 1964, 9th of February, if I'm being an anorak.
It's clearly a great.
Yes, and when I mention this to people, I remember having, I wouldn't say a discussion, an argument with somebody last year, because he said, oh, big deal. I said, yeah. I said, I'm telling you, if the Americans or the British had been the ones to do it, you would never hear the end of it. You would never hear the end of it. But because it's ours, you dismiss it and say, yeah, big deal. Yeah, this is a big deal. But now nobody has to lick stamps unless they like the taste of the gum or something, It's all self-adhesive all over the world. 1964, we did it, Yeah. And so there are things that we were doing that were quite almost, I wouldn't say avant-garde, but they were kind of thinking outside the box. Because if anybody knows, for example, the central bank building in Freetown, there's this very avant-garde looking mural outside, and it's by a French-Canadian chap called Jordi Bonnet, who actually he lost an arm in childhood, so he had one arm. He was a painter, he was a sculptor, and he did that. And I went in search of, and then I found out, he died in his 40s, so he's quite young when he died. But I contacted his family about 2 years ago, because they had done a book and a website about all the murals he had done around the world, and they did not include the Sierra Leone one, because they weren't even aware of it.
Oh my
God. And I had taken a photograph which shows his signature. In the bottom. It says J. Bonnet, and then 1964. And I sent it to them, and they've now included it on the website, but they weren't even aware of it.
Amazing.
And the reason that came about was Sierra Leone took part in the World Trade Fair in America in 1964, and they met the guy there. They liked his work and said, we're building this central bank building. We'd like to commission something from you. And that was what they commissioned. That's quite remarkable.
That's
really
fascinating, actually. And of course, you have this knack, Ade, don't you, for digging up these esoteric facts that a lot of people won't necessarily be aware of, but somehow Ade will be able to just pinpoint. And if there's any additional information or further facts needed, he will somehow manage to
it's interesting you say that. Yes, it's interesting you say that, because it's something I'm quite proud of, because I remember my cousin Patrice, who Patrice was when he was at the Royal Shakespeare Company, he was staying at my house in Brixton, and he came on one day. We were just chatting, just idly. And I said to him, I said, by the way, do your people at Royal Shakespeare Company know that the first recorded performance of a Shakespearean play outside of Britain was off the coast of Sierra Leone? And it was given by a ship's captain on behalf of the Sierra Leonean chiefs. And he looked at me like,
incredulously.
are you sure? And of course, when he went back there to tell them this, they like, yeah, very funny. But of course, thankfully, as many Europeans do, they like to keep records. So the ship's captain had kept a diary, and that actual diary is at the National Archives in Kew. Anybody can go and read it. He records there that on the journey to Sierra Leone, he had rehearsed his crew to perform, I think, Richard III or one of those, you know, and by the time they got there, they were word perfect, and they performed it for the chiefs. It's recorded in his diary. So again, don't take my word for it. Go to the National Archives in Kew, and you will find it there, the first recorded instance of a Shakespearean play. And having frowned on it now, of course, the Royal Shakespeare Company includes that fact on their website, but they never had it before, you know, and you can quote me on that.
Have it on record.
Quite, you know, but though, so you're right. I like digging up these sort of esoteric facts that people think, oh, you know, again, another esoteric fact I'll throw in, the last diplomat to be received in the White House by John F. Kennedy was Gershon Collier, Sierra Leone's ambassador to the United States. 2 days after he received him in the White House, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. So, yeah, so as you say, I dig up these esoteric facts and like to, you know, astonish people with them.
It's your forte. It's your forte. You know, Sierra Leone it's a country to be proud of. We have so many. It's a multifaceted country, and I think I really do feel it's incumbent on us to keep the history alive, such as it is. I remember you also mentioned that you were asked by the former president, by Nkrumah, to write a report on Sierra Leone's 50th year of independence. How did that come about?
Yes.
I was wondering.
Oh, you really want to know? You know, being the sort of person I am, of course, I knew that the 50th anniversary was fast approaching. And so I had intended to do something to commemorate it, because I thought, you know, a golden jubilee is something worth celebrating, commemorating, whatever the case may be. And so I, by various surreptitious means, contacted the president's office in Freetown and said that I wanted to do this book. I would edit or write all of it if necessary, or I would work on it with various historians. And then I got a letter from the president's office saying, yes, go ahead with our blessings. This would be something really great to commemorate the 50th anniversary of independence. Mm-hmm. And so I went along to the High Commission to tell them that I was going to be doing this, because in London, to get their buy-in as well. But unfortunately, they had contracted somebody else to do it. And I was like, okay. So I went to see the people who had been contracted to do it. And I met a chap who, bless him, he's passed away, a former British Army chap, but he did these books. And so I arranged a meeting with him. We sat down, we chatted. And at first I thought, because of the British connection, I thought, oh, he's one of these Brits who'd been to Sierra Leone a few times, knew a bit about Sierra Leone. So I asked very casually in the maybe 10, 15 minutes into the conversation, how many times have you been to Sierra Leone? And he said, never. And I said, oh, so what's your, he said, oh, I get asked to do these things. And he said, for a country like Sierra Leone, because I've never been and I don't know it, I'll just go on Wikipedia and grab some stuff and I'll use that. And in my arrogance, I said, actually, no, you won't. And he was quite taken aback. And he said, what do you mean? I said, okay, open your laptop. Let's go to Wikipedia page on Sierra Leone. And I will show you 4 or 5 facts that are 100% wrong. I said, and if you were to capture those and put them in a book, you'd be a laughing stock. I said, and now that I know this, I said, there's no way I'm going to stand down and let you do something like this. I said, call me arrogant or whatever you want, but I will not let it happen. And I could see the kind of incredulous looks from all these Brits in the room. And so they said, well, what do you suggest? I said, I will write it myself. And so I took over the project. And, you know, I brought in a few people to sort of work on various chapters. And, you know, Franklin Johnson was one of them. He's very versed in sort of Creole history and so on and so forth. The chapter on the kind of Freetown and the Creoles, you know, I got him to do that. But the rest of it, I wrote pretty much myself. And you were talking about esoteric facts. One of the things I did was I contacted museums around Europe. So in Spain, in Holland, in Portugal. I mean, some of these have got artifacts from Sierra Leone that 90% or 99% of Sierra Leoneans don't even know are there in these museums. So some of the ones I got from Portugal, for example, I got photographs of ivory carvings that are about 2 to 3 feet high. And they were like, what? We had elephants that had tusks of that, you know, size in Sierra Leone.
Wow.
And yes, and of course, again, these are all recorded by the Portuguese, you know, 1472 and so on, where they got these from, you know, they got them from Sierra Leone that year or 1489 and so on. It's all recorded.
Yeah.
And so I reproduced, you know, got the museums to send me high resolution photographs that we include in the book. And I remember the first time some people saw the book, they're like, what have these got to do with Sierra Leone? I said, read on and you'll see. You know, so things like that. There are museums in Holland, in Spain, that have artifacts from Sierra Leone that they've had for 300, 400, 500 years, that many Sierra Leoneans have never seen. And unless you go to these museums and you have a close look, and someone like myself, because of course, you know, that's my kind of thing. That's the sort of thing I do. If I see something, I'm intrigued by it. I think, oh, I wonder if that is from Sierra Leone. Yeah. And many times you'll find it is, because they don't shout about it.
Of course.
And that's why we don't know about it. And that's why the rest of the world doesn't know about it.
Absolutely.
Really. Yeah.
That book sounds like quite a compendium. So
it's online. It's online. It's free to download. It's at, if you go to the Sierra Leone web, okay. It's free to download.
I might include it later on.
Yes, and tomorrow we're recording this on the 26th. I don't know if mentioning the date is going to mess it up or anything like that. But on the 27th of September 1961, since its formation in 1948, the UN had never hit 100 members. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? 27th of September, which nation became the 100 member? Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone finally allowed the UN to hit that magic century mark of countries that were member states. And that is going, and and of course, that is also commemorated in a book, which again is it's available to download on that same Sierra Leone web. It's run by a friend of mine, Peter Anderson, who lives in the States. He's an American. He's married to a Sierra Leonean. Right. Initially went to Sierra Leone as a Peace Corps, and for many years ran the best news site during the war about what was happening in Sierra Leone. That's where we all used to go to get our information, and that's how he and I became friends. And so when I have these artifacts, there are other things on there that I've kind of used to commemorate the 55th anniversary. There's another book I did that's also on there as well. And yeah, he's always been willing to host them because he feels that they're of a certain quality that he's quite proud to host on the site. Yeah. So yes, I mean, it's about sharing the information, about telling people that actually we have a history to be proud of and even something to aspire to try and get back to those heights. Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Incidentally, have you managed to attend the, there's an exhibition about Sierra Leone at, of course,
Docklands.
You know, the London Docklands, yes. So that started, I believe, last year. And of course, COVID has had a bit of an effect.
Yes, on it, but one of the curators of it is my best friend, Ade Thomas. So of course I've been. I was there on the opening day
Of
actually.
course.
Yeah. So and that one is as you can imagine something close to my heart in terms of not just the fact that a friend of mine was involved in it, but also what it depicts and the story that it tells of the Creoles particularly. It's a wonderful history, and I think everybody I know who's been to it, Sierra Leoneans and non-Sierra Leoneans, have left there feeling thoroughly enthralled and inspired by it. It's a really uplifting exhibition, and I commend it to everybody. It's reopened again, so people can go, and it's been extended to next year as well.
Yes, I expect so.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't managed to attend, but I'm quite looking
Oh,
forward.
it's worth it. Absolutely, you should. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm guessing it covers the history entirely of the country as opposed to the capital.
It's mainly about the Creoles. It's mainly about the Creoles,
Right.
and mainly about Freetown, and so that's what it. But there are aspects there because obviously Freetown did not exist in a vacuum, and so it lists the interactions and so on, and it gives you a kind of potted history. And yes, I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's worth attending. Yeah.
It's high on my list. And
Good.
we talk about the Creoles. Just going back to growing up in Sierra Leone, of course, I know that your mother is Creole and your father was Muslim.
Mandinka.
And Dinka.
Yes.
Was he active? Was he active in the Islamic faith or?
No, my father was one of these people who he could speak Arabic fluently. He could read the Quran in its original language, but he wasn't a practicing. In fact, he drank like a fish. I mean, it's not a secret to anybody who knew my father. If I were to say he was a heavy drinker, everybody who knew my father knew that. So he was not practicing, but he certainly knew enough. As I said, he could read the Quran, and we always had a Quran and a Bible in the house growing up. And they kind of left it around for us to choose. We weren't forced down one route or another. Yeah.
Which is great. I mean, it's good to have that duality in terms of your upbringing. But from what I recall, growing up in Sierra Leone as a child, there was always this, how should we put it, maybe a healthy tension between, say, the Creoles who were quite snobbish about, within the Creole society, marrying within our, Creole society, and were quite strict and would want to ensure that, a Muslim man married another Muslim woman, regardless of whether actively practicing on. Is that did you get a sense of that when you're growing up, or was your household?
The reason I got a sense of it was because it was quite amazing that on one side I had a great grandfather who was a bishop, and on my father's side I had a great grandfather who was an imam. I mean, you could not be more. So growing up, I think my grandmother, if people were to ask her, would have said in an honest moment that she felt disappointed that her daughter, i.e. my mother, had not married somebody who had grown up as a Christian. My father acquiesced to the extent where they got married at St. Luke's in Chelsea. So they got married in church. So it's a full church white wedding, the whole lot. And I still have the photographs from that. Yeah. In fact, I have the whole album from it. And so my grandmother, I never got on with her. Let me not beat about the bush. and a lot of it stemmed from that. Honestly, I thought she was a dreadful snob. And that kind of rubbed me up the wrong way because of the kind of egalitarian way that our parents had brought us up. And they'd drummed into us not to look down on anybody. And so it always really galled when she did certain things. I don't want to go into them too much, but she was a dreadful snob and grew up in a very privileged household. Obviously her father was the bishop, and they lived a certain lifestyle. My mother, I remember telling me that when she went to animal school, at the time she was the only girl who was driven to school in a car. There were so few cars there. Or perambulators, as they were probably referred to in those days. But yes, so that was the kind of thing. But it was changing because there were many more people who were like my parents, who came from a Muslim and Christian background, who were meeting and getting married to each other. It always amazed me when I one day asked my mother, again, as you do casually, so how did you and my father meet? And she said, and where? And of course, I assumed that because my father had lived on First Street and my mother had lived on Mountain Cut. Anybody knows these. First Street goes like a T, Mountain Cut, and so that was, I'd always believed that. And she said, no, we were actually introduced at the Porchester Hall in Marylebone,
all the way
in London, by mutual friends at a Wasu dance. I said, what? Wasu, West African Students Union, which used to be very active. I mean, all the greats from Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, who went on to have, sort of glowing careers in politics. All of them were members of the West African Students Union. It used to be very vibrant. It kind of died out around the sort of early 70s, really. But in the 50s, right through the 60s, these people, that's where they used to meet and get together, and they were forever holding dances, and they were always held at Porchester Hall, and that's where they met. So there were others who were like that, who had that kind of, different religious backgrounds. But once we were in Freetown, it wasn't too much of a problem because we spent as much time with our Muslim family as we did with the Christian family, and everybody knows up to this day, we still celebrate and commemorate as as do other families. And so that by that time it was changing, really. I mean, I even met somebody who told me that he married, he was a Creole, and he married a Fuller woman in 1940, and that raised a lot of so. Well, absolutely it did. Absolutely it did. So yes, my parents got married in 1950. So that was 10 years after that, and went back. And there were other friends of theirs who were in similar positions who had Muslim and Christian background. So it wasn't really much of a problem. We heard the odd thing or two, but not a big deal. And for somebody like me, I was never likely to shut up. I wouldn't be quiet about it. I would always challenge it, and so I was forever getting into discussions, shall we say, about that sort of thing. Yeah, but one of the things that I probably didn't mention when we were discussing Butterfly was, funnily enough, even though many children in Freetown certainly had Yoruba names like mine. I'm Adeyemi Olusegun Abiose. When I went to CKC in Bo, it was funny because people thought they could laugh at me because I had African names. And of course, I thought, you really don't know who you're dealing with. You all have names like Peter and John, and you're named after all these saints. I'm an African living in Africa. Do you really think you're going to make me embarrassed about having African names? I mean, I shut it down pretty quickly.
In no time.
It's like, please. I mean, 90% of them did not have African names because they were Catholics. So they had these names that they felt, Catholics should have. Obviously they had Sierra Leonean surnames. Obviously it's mainly Mende area, but it's that they thought that I should be embarrassed. I thought it was a joke.
But just to get the context, Ade, I mean, this was a school where, was it over 90% of the teaching force you said were Europeans?
Absolutely, yes, more than 90%.
Yes. If their mindset then was all things Anglophile is the best, that's the way.
Well, pretty much. And I think because they were Catholics as well, I mean, there was always this kind of tradition where Catholics did not give their children, for want of a better word, African names. So again, 90% of them did not. They were Peter, Paul, they were John, names like that. Pius even, Pius IV after Pope Pius, so yeah, you had, Pius IV was my well, not my contemporary, he was older than me, but we were there at the same time. And so those are the sorts of names that people had. And as I said, within about 2 or 3 days, I never heard any more of it, because I think some of them started looking at themselves and thinking, actually, yeah, we're the ridiculous ones.
Back home to
but yeah,
question them.
So why didn't you give us African names?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it happened. And so, the country and the society was changing, it was evolving. And it was a very interesting and important time in the country's history, because we talk about formative years. In a sense, those were also the country's formative years. It was the kind of immediate post-independent period when we were taking control of our own affairs as much as we could or should have done. And of course, in the main, we did not do it in the way that we should have done. The country, for its size, should be one of the richest on the African continent, and yet it's one of the poorest. That will always be a tragedy, because I think the opportunity to have made it so is probably gone. But there are other things that one can do to redress what happened, really.
Yeah, and this is the thing, and you talk about that whole independence period where obviously we, the Sierra Leoneans, decided to take the reins for ourselves and start to do things ourselves. We didn't need to rely on our colonial masters anymore. In fact, just today we hear about Barbados taking a stand as well to say.
Oh, yeah, about 3 or 4 days ago, actually.
I found out today.
Right. Yeah.
It's quite a landmark moment. So I mean, similarly, when we got to that point where we thought, actually, it's time that the Africans did it for themselves.
Yeah.
Of course, it was a positive move in the right direction, but yet we're still plagued, aren't we, Ade, with this notion that all things, European or English sounding are the right things, and all things light-skinned, either of a lighter hue or white, are the things to aspire to. Why on earth in this 21st century are we still, grappling with these issues?
It's baffling. It's baffling to me. Because really, as you rightly say, I mean, there are countries where you go, they might not like to hear it, but even here in the Gambia, where people who are white or are lighter skinned are given the kind of pass that would not be given to somebody black. I mean, there's at least one person who's the general manager of one of the biggest hotels in the country, who came here as a tourist, was stranded, had never worked in the hotel industry, and now he's general manager at one of the biggest ones here. That would never happen if he was black. Never, not in this country. They wouldn't even entertain him going for the job or giving it to him, and all because he can speak English well, and he can be, in quotes, presentable to the mainly white clientele that they get. That's why that person got that job. So, that mentality needs to change, and change fast. But I don't get the sense, really, that it is, or not quick enough for my liking. Yeah.
And it's happening across the globe. Obviously, it's not just Africa-centric. It's a mentality that happens. You find here in the UK and in the US.
Yeah.
It perplexes me.
And me.
It's a topic that goes way beyond this video recording.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, just turning to some maybe less glorious aspects of Sierra Leone, namely the war, the civil war that broke out. And I think at that time you were reporting for the BBC.
I was at Bush House, yes.
Yeah, so I'm aware that obviously in your professional capacity you were quite connected to the story, that piece of history that we can't forget. But also on an emotional side, clearly, I think your brother was there at the time, and he was...
My brother was actually there. Yes, my brother was...
Lots of information.
That's right. I mean, there are times when we needed to get information about what was happening. There was one incident when Johnny Paul Koroma took over coup d'etat, and the then High Commissioner, I had gone along with everybody else to get information, and the High Commissioner bottled it. And I ended up giving a press conference, mainly because obviously being somebody who worked at BBC at the time, I knew a lot of information. But then fielding questions from journalists. I mean, you had the Nigerian High Commissioner and the Ghanaian High Commissioner were there to lend their support, but our own High Commissioner did not speak. This is on record. You know, I was the one who I gave the briefing and I took the Q&A. For the BBC itself, as you rightly say, for people like myself, when we were hearing these stories, it was quite terrible, because when you're at a distance and you hear these things, and it's something I've learned over time, is that they always sound worse. And your imagination magnifies and amplifies them to probably a lot worse than they really are, even, you know, dreadful though it was. And so we had to be professional about it, those of us who were Sierra Leoneans who were working at Bush House for the BBC World Service, in how we related. And sometimes we were able to say to them, oh, you might want to check and recheck this fact, because, you know, my brother's there and he's told me this, he's told me that, and so on. And for me, one of the kind of cataclysmic, and I guess for many Sierra Leoneans, you mentioned the date, 6th of January 1999, was the date when officially the war came to Freetown.
That was when the rebels moved in, wasn't it?
When the rebels moved in. I'd been there just a few weeks before. People were completely blasé. They said they would never come. Look at how fortified Freetown is. And yet they overran it. It was like stealing candy from a baby. You know, that's how easy it was. And my brother, unfortunately, was there at the time. He escaped. I mean, fortunately, he escaped. But what he saw remained with him. And for a long time afterwards, and he won't mind me saying this, he was traumatized by it, you know, by the sort of killing and things that he saw. And so for us, as you say, you know, reporting things is very difficult for us to kind of, keep things, on a level playing field. You know, and keep our professionalism, you know.
I mean,
you know?
I guess it's interesting you speak about professionalism. That has to be the biggest challenge for any reporter, when you're, on the one hand, trying to maintain your composure and, you know, be the consummate journalist, but at the same time, you are also dealing with a lot of emotions. You're also dealing with,
quite.
You know, suffering trauma, I guess, vicariously. How did you marry those two aspects?
You know, somebody asked again. It's funny, these questions keep coming up, because somebody asked me that today, and I said that in a way I thank the BBC for that, because they drummed this into us about being dispassionate when you're reporting, even in a situation where you have an emotional attachment and a connection that is unavoidable. I mean, this is the place I grew up. This is the place I call home. You know, how could I report on it, you know, in a kind of dispassionate manner? It was not easy. It was not easy, you know. Sorry, I'm just trying to plug in because my computer's losing power, and I'm trying to.
Don't worry.
Yes.
Well, probably the computer's probably thinking, "Isn't it time we wrap this up?"
No, not at all, not at all. You know.
It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just plugging in. Yeah.
No, that's okay. I mean, I'm just fascinated by you would have had to develop quite a robust mindset to just soldier on, for want of a better term, during that.
It's interesting you say that, because, you know, the reason I was explaining it to somebody here was I was saying that it was the making of me as a reporter, because it tested me. Because you can have all the kind of theoretical, you know, things about, you know, about how you might deal in certain situations and how you might deal with certain things that might come up. But until you're tested like that, it's all just theory. And so I felt I was tested, and wasn't an exam, but I felt I passed the test because I was able to be dispassionate. I was able to be professional, and get the information without being emotional, without getting carried away. Much as inside, there were times when I wanted to weep because of the information that we were imparting. But you had to keep your equilibrium and say, this is my job. I have to report on this. And what if this was somebody from Rwanda reporting during the genocide? Do they lose it on camera or on radio? No, they try and hold it down. But it's difficult because the emotional attachment is so strong, it's so deep, it's almost impossible not to feel. But what you don't want to is let it come across to the audience that you're somebody, because then that becomes the focus of what they hear. They don't hear whatever news you're giving. They hear your emotional or over-emotional reaction. So as I say, myself and others who were there, Josephine Hazley was there, also from Sierra Leone. We managed to kind of hold it down in a positive way. And I'm aware there weren't any instances where somebody said, oh, you let the fact that you're Sierra Leonean get in the way of the report that you did.
Yeah. And I imagine there's an element of maybe going into autopilot, but was there ever a significant moment where it really kind of hit home that this is real? And yes, here I am working, but just a singular moment. I'm sure there were several where it all just felt a bit too much, maybe.
Well, funny enough, I mean, that because the war was so nasty and vicious, in a way it helped that we had to deal with that every day, us who were Sierra Leoneans. For the Nigerians and the Ghanaians who were there, yes, it was a sister nation that was going through this, but they weren't Sierra Leoneans. For us, it was family that might be the victims next, And so on a daily basis, but there was one instance when the rebels phoned in, they had these radio telephones, so they could phone Bush House from the bush, no pun intended, and say that if the troops don't withdraw from such and such a place, we're going to go in and we're going to trash Freetown. And Elizabeth Ohene, the Ghanaian lady who worked for the BBC, went on to be a government minister in Ghana, happened to be the one that they spoke to. And she said, so what are you asking? And he said, I want you to put us on air so we can tell the world that if they... And so she said, okay, you are Sierra Leoneans and you want me to give you a platform to tell the world that you're going to destroy your own capital city. And you think that's a good idea. She said, I'm not doing it. So you can either hang up or forget it, and we all there, we all applauded that moment. She may or may not remember it because there were so many ridiculous instances when they would phone in from the bush. But for us, that was a moment when to hear somebody say that this place you knew like the back of your hand, they were going to go in and destroy it. That was like a punch in the guts. It really, that was, if I was to pick one moment, that would probably be it. That was quite a sickener because you thought to yourself, yes, you might have hung up the phone on them, but that doesn't mean they're not going to do it, And of course, as fate would have it, 6th of January, they did exactly that. Destroyed large parts, burnt many houses, burnt people in their houses, even. And for us, it was tough. I mean, my brother was able to eventually escape. There were British and American ships that were airlifting and shipping people out to Guinea, and then from Guinea to the UK. But those were tough times because, every minute you worried about family there. And as you were doing a broadcast, that was what was going on in your head, really, not the broadcast. So you always made sure you had something written down. Whereas normally someone like myself, I like to do it, ad lib. But, you think I might lose it if I do that because the emotion might get to me. So those were some of the coping mechanisms, really. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, a few of us, myself included, were quite fortunate to have been over here at the time, and we're getting a lot of the information secondhand, but yeah, it really was a dreadful time in our history, and I have to
Sure.
applaud the likes of yourself who were there on the front line, effectively doing a job, and
Sure, sure.
really trying to manage those two sides as best you could. No amount of
Yeah.
training, I don't think, could prepare you for something like that. Of course, you
Yeah,
read
yeah.
textbooks, and
Well, yeah, and in the textbooks, you know, you paint a certain picture in your head. But I can tell you or anybody who's watching this, when you're living through it, those textbooks have never prepared you for it, other than the fact that in your head is the voice of your trainer, your instructor, saying, if ever you find yourself in this situation, try and stay professional, try and stay dispassionate. That voice in your head is what keeps you on course. But all the time you're fighting these emotions, for sure, for sure. Yeah, yeah,
was there ever a need
yeah.
to go and report on the ground, as it were? Did that ever arise, or was it always remote?
You know, I missed a couple of opportunities. I went there when they had this bizarre peace deal that was signed, and Fode Sanko was made deputy president and minister of mines. I think people were trying to be ironic by giving him that portfolio. And so I went to Freetown, and I remember being there on, I think it was Easter Monday, and Fode Sanko drove through the streets of Freetown. He was dressed all in white in an open-top car, and I thought he was going to be stoned to death. But people actually came out and were waving at him. I was horrified. I was actually horrified.
And you saw this.
And so I was, yes. But what was even more scandalous, really, was that he lived on a house on Spur Road, as did I. I was staying with my brother at the time. And my ex-mother-in-law happened to be living in the house as part of Fode Sanko's coterie of admirers. And so she tried to set up an interview with me for him with the BBC. And honestly, if I have one single regret in life, it is probably that I didn't go ahead with the interview, because when I said, oh, it'll be great, he then sent through his emissaries a long list of things I could not ask him about. I could not ask him about amputations and mutilations. I couldn't ask him about signing up boy soldiers or child soldiers. I couldn't ask him about the mining that his people were doing. I couldn't ask him about whether he had any links with Charles Taylor. And I thought, we're just going to sit here and talk football then. You know, and so in anger, I turned it down. But honestly, I regret it now. And the reason I really regret it is because I had intended to spend 2 weeks in Freetown, 1 week in Gambia, and then another week in Freetown with my brother. So when I came to the Gambia, was when the incident happened, which led to Fode Sanko. Some people were protesting because some people were obviously disgusted by what had happened when people were waving at him in the streets. And so they were chanting in the streets, and they went to the house, this very house, and his guards opened fire. And the whole thing escalated very, very quickly from that. Oh, wow. He then fled the house and of course was caught some days later in similar circumstances to Muammar Gaddafi, the way Gaddafi was caught. Yes. And I tried to come back, but of course, because of what was going on, I couldn't curtail my time in Banjul to go back to Freetown because they weren't allowing any flights for about 3 or so days. Sure. So in that time, he was then, you know, apprehended and in custody. And of course, eventually, as we know, he died in custody. So I kind of missed the opportunity to sort of get back and interview him. And of course, my ex-mother-in-law and everybody else who was living in the house, because they fled once Fode Sanko had fled and had been captured because they realized that their lives might be in danger, that people might lynch them. I mean, that was the sentiment, really. So it was a very fraught time. So yeah, I mean, that me turning down the interview in a huff was, I think, now a missed opportunity.
You know, it's funny when you say that. Of course, there's a very popular saying in Creole, vex take, no vex left.
No, no vex, absolutely, no vex left,
Which I
absolutely.
suppose a direct translation would be, no matter how upset you are, take it, don't leave it.
Yeah, don't leave it, quite
Because,
swallow
yeah,
your anger.
it would
Yeah,
have, yeah, it's a slow to anger. And it would have been interesting just to turn it on its head and just say, well,
yeah.
yes, I understand that, you know, certain topics are off, off the
Mm.
board. But what would you like to speak about? And
Well,
just
yeah, indeed, and that's what, you know,
hear what he had to say.
that and that is the regret, because it would have been interesting. He would have talked about, you know, getting rid of corruption, corrupt regimes, and so on. I'd heard it all before, but I guess it would have been nice. Perhaps there might have been an in where I could have asked one of my more difficult
Oh, for
questions.
sure. I'm sure you could
Yeah,
have circumvented, Ade. Found a
I'm
way
sure.
around it.
Quite.
Definitely.
Yeah, but that was an interesting time for sure. For sure.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm.
yeah.
And I mean, were there any other interesting times at the BBC during your career at Bush House, aside
Yeah,
from the challenges
yeah. I
that
mean,
presented you?
yeah. I mean, I was. I'm thankful to the BBC for recognizing the fact that I have many interests, and
Mm.
so I wasn't. I was hired initially as a sports reporter, um, but even then I started making waves because I complained that the only sport we seemed to report on was football.
Right.
As if that's the only sport played in Africa. But there were instances also for me to work with the North African service, where at the time I was a practicing Muslim. I attended a mosque in Bouch Street. And there were times when, you know, there would be, they would have interviewed somebody and they wanted somebody would do the translation from Arabic to English rather, and they wanted somebody to do the voicing and so on. So that meant, you know, me working with, but of course, there were lots of Arabs who wanted to be given the chance to do that. But it was an interesting time because in many instances, you know, I was able to kind of, don't use the word mimic in any kind of negative sense, but kind of mimic the accent that was required for either Algeria, Morocco, or Tunisia. And because of that, I got called on a few times to do those sorts of projects. So that was quite interesting. I would get called to speak on African art, on cinema, on music. As I said, they gave me free reign, really, and I'm forever grateful. I'm thankful for that, because not everybody had that free reign. I was also known as somebody who would do stuff in one take, and people used to say, "How do you do it?" I'm like, I don't know.
It just happened.
Well, yeah, you know, you know, how do you explain something like that, you know? And
Indeed.
so, yeah, but it was fun times, and I still do the occasional work for the BBC in terms of I write a column called Letter from Africa.
Yes.
It's meant to be every 2 months, but I get busy, and sometimes I don't quite fulfill that.
Yes,
But
the fans are waiting, Ade. What's going on? We haven't had a letter in a while.
yeah, if I tell you why we haven't had a letter, you might think, oh gosh, I'm sure the BBC would thank me for this, but I'll tell you anyway. Back in June, I had suggested writing a letter about a song called Jerusalema.
Oh my. You had to go there, didn't you?
I had to go there, and they turned it down. They turned it down
Well,
because, like, yeah, big deal. The songs had 27 million views in 6 months. So what?
oh
And
my goodness.
I
No.
said, yeah. They turned it down, and again, as I said, this is on record. So if anybody denies it, I have the emails to prove it where they rejected the idea.
Wow. Now that is rather interesting. Sorry, I have to interject there. So adding the song to my consciousness. I can't even say the word.
Consciousness, yes.
That's the one.
Yeah,
He brought it to my
yeah.
awareness just a few days ago, in fact, or a week ago, I can't remember. And I have not been able to stop playing this song. As usual, a bit late to the party, but trust me, I am making up for lost time. So I'm listening to endless remix versions difference, as anyone who knows, Jerusalem is one of those it's gone beyond viral. It's
Right.
literally, you know, every party, be it a wedding, a
Wedding
baby shower,
or
no matter what the occasion, you will have, you know, scores of people just spontaneously breaking into dance, and it suddenly becomes all about Jerusalem. And if you haven't
yes.
heard the song, I strongly recommend that you go out and you check it out.
Uh,
It is amazing. And
yes.
to think that once again,
Yeah.
Ade, there you were, you know, with this prescient ability to see that the
Yes.
song clearly
Yes.
had a lot of potential back in June, because I imagine that's when it first came
Yeah.
out, right? Around that time.
No, I mean the funny thing was it came out in December, and that's why I wanted to draw an analogy with it going viral and with COVID, because COVID also came out in December of 2019, and so that was the analogy I was drawing in the song. That in the same way that the virus has gone worldwide,
Yes.
this song has gone worldwide, because at the time in June there were only about 100 versions of it where people were doing the dance, the Jerusalem dance challenge, as they're now calling it. There were only about 100, and I say only about. There are now over 700 of the
Well,
damn
there you
things,
have it.
you know. But 100 I thought was a significant number worth recording in this thing, but they shot it down and said, you know, who the hell, you know, now, you know, so every time
What a
it breaks a
story.
barrier, as for you know, most Shazam song ever, 180 million views on the original video as we speak. I send them a link and say, I don't want to say I told you so, but I did tell you so.
Maybe you should check this
You know,
out.
you know, yeah. So I sent them one today where some rangers in Zimbabwe are doing the dance along with their elephants.
No way.
In a wildlife park, exactly. Yeah, I saw it on VOA and I thought I have to share it, and that was today. That was today, just about an hour before you and I started talking, actually.
Right. Well, I'm an
But the
avid
song is, yeah,
I'm
the
an
song is
avid
taken on.
wildlife fan, so I'll need to check that out.
Ah, well, you have to check that one out. You have to check out. But the song has taken on a life of its own, and that was what I wanted to record. But they kind of, as I say, they shot it down.
No, that was an opportunity missed.
Yeah,
I have to say, I'm a big fan of the BBC, but you definitely missed the boat there.
Yeah. Yes.
Now, I mean, just to wind down, Ade, in my mind, I've been thinking it'll be great to, you know, maybe conclude with some of your interests, some of which you've mentioned.
Sure.
And of course, in my head, I'm thinking, would it be music? Would it be the arts, culture? But I think, soon as we've started talking about Jerusalem, I have to ask. So, music, which I believe is one of your first loves, right?
No, music is my first love. You know, growing up, I remember once saying to, you know, when people have these discussions, as you do, you know, what would be the thing that you would miss most of your senses?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, if I missed my sense of hearing and I couldn't hear music anymore, I said I would kill myself. And they thought I was joking. Actually, I wasn't joking, and I'm not even joking now. I'm an obsessive over music, and I like music for as long as I can remember. I mean, to the extent where when we went to Sierra Leone, we were fortunate that 2 doors away from us was a DJ who had his own, they would call it a sound system, but essentially he was somebody who got invited to play at dances in the afternoons or in the evenings. And I befriended him just because of my love of music. And one day he invited me to one of the dances he was playing at Independence School, which was just up the road from where we lived at a place called Alfred Street. And, you know, I was listening, I was enjoying it. And then he put on a record, Jailhouse Rock by Elvis Presley. And the effect was electrifying on the audience. Obviously, it was a popular song. Yeah. And people who were busy chatting in the corners took to the floor and they were dancing. And what I liked about this guy was that he played a mixture of music. He played African music from Congo, from Sierra Leone. He played calypsos. He played pop music. And he played this rock and roll. They still played songs by Chuck Berry, by Little Richard. Well, Jailhouse Rock was the one that did it for me. And I kept thinking, when this dance is over, I have to have this record. And so imagine, at the time I was 9 years old. And so when the dance finished, I said to him, where can I get this record? I said, this record is now burned in my brain. And imagine 9-year-old, and this is his business, but he trusted me enough to say to me, here, take it home. When you find a copy, bring my copy back.
Aww.
And I can tell you, at the age of 9, I went to every record shop in Freetown. At the time, we had about 15 or so shops that sold discs, 7-inch 45s or LPs.
Yeah.
And after the 4th or 5th one, a place called Kingsway Stores was where I went, and I showed them the record. I said, do you have this record by Elvis Presley? And they said the magic words, we think we have it. And in fact, we probably have several other records by him. I'm like, this guy's made other records? So I bought it.
Yeah.
And then I used to get given, as did my siblings, pocket money every week. And every week I would spend my pocket money on the cinema, and on a record. I would buy a record a week. And that went on for years. Even after I left Sierra Leone, I carried on buying records to the extent where I have now 10, 20,000 records in my
and he's not
flat
kidding.
in London, my house in London. I'm not kidding. And so that was part of where the music bug was. But also I'm thankful for Sierra Leone's radio stations. They played a wide variety of music. And I'm one of these people who, if I hear a song that ends up meaning a lot to me, I can take you back to the very spot I was when I heard that record.
Yeah.
That's what records and music does for me.
Yeah.
I remember there's a lady called Alison Krauss. She's a bluegrass stroke country singer.
Right.
And she did a song called I Will. The song was originally done by the Beatles on their White Album in 1968. But theirs is quite short, like 1 minute and 30 seconds, but she stretched it, and hers is a more beautiful version. And I was driving in London at the time. This is about 15 years ago. And I actually found somewhere to park because I said, when this record is finished, I need to know and write down who this is.
Wow.
Her voice was so beautiful. She's got one of the purest voices you could ever. And in fact, I now have all her records, Alison Krauss. And I parked and it's finished. And the DJ said, that was Alison Krauss with the Beatles, I Will. And I wrote it down and I continued on my journey. And the next day, I actually managed to find it at HMV, which was still around at the time on Oxford Street. Bless you. And so, music has always meant a lot to me. It's kind of, as I say, defined everything from my relationship with my family, romantic relationships. There are partners, ex-partners who you might find the same. You have a record that means something to you and that person, either in the lyric or where you were when you heard it. I remember one particular ex was, it was the first record we danced to, became our song because it was playing and we thought, oh, let's dance to this and I'll say it again. So there are those sorts of things. I've attended lots and lots of concerts over the years, some historic ones. I mean, the Bob Marley and the Wailers concert where they recorded No Woman, No Cry, which was their first hit of any substance in England. And I can say this again without fear of contradiction. I was the first person through the door. Myself and my cousin Evelyn, we got there 2 or 3 hours earlier at the Lyceum before anybody else.
Wow.
And they were like, oh, we're not open yet, we're not open yet. We say, okay, we're not going anywhere, we'll wait. And so when they opened the doors at the Lyceum, there wasn't a stage proper. It was about 7 or 8 inches high, the stage that the band were on. And so you were face to face with them. I was in front of the very microphone that Bob Marley was singing into. So if anybody has pictures from that concert, believe me, I am in that photograph. Because seriously, and I remember it so clearly. In fact, when I went home from that particular concert, I told my siblings, I said, at this concert tonight, Bob Marley did No Woman No Cry in a completely different way from the album version. And I was trying to explain to them how he had done it. He'd slowed it down and then they have fast bit at the end. And then a week later, that live version was released as a single. So I didn't have to explain anymore. They heard it and everybody was
talking about.
Everybody was blown away by it. But honestly, my siblings will tell you, I went home and for much that I enjoyed the whole concert. And in fact, it was also the first ever concert in London by the band Third World, who of course went on to have lots and lots of hits, Now That We Found Love and so on. That was their first ever concert. They were on stage before the Wailers. But for all the beauty of that concert, the way they did No Woman No Cry, I just couldn't get it out of my head. And I bored my family silly with it, because every time we would play the record, that the studio version, I would try to explain to them how we slowed down this bit and so on.
Different, it was better.
And, it was soulful, because I kept using the word soulful. I said he sang the first bit as a ballad, not that kind of fast pace of the studio version. And then, of course, when it came out, literally a week later, I thought, have a listen. This is what I was talking about.
Somebody took me seriously.
And it's amazing, because of all the songs, that should be the one that I had been raving about, should be the one that they would release, was astonishing and very pleasing for me. But so I've seen all my favorites. Aretha Franklin, I've seen her 3 times. Gladys Knight, I've seen Frankie Beverly and Mays. Loads of Smokey Robinson. I can even tell you that when I saw Smokey Robinson, one of my favorite stars ever was sitting in front of me, and that was Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder was in the seat directly in front of me.
Which venue was that?
This was the venue at Victoria. It has several names. It's got the play about the witches playing there now. Wicked.
Wicked.
Right, well, that venue, I can't remember what it was called before, but it's that venue. And Stevie Wonder was in front of me. And in a way I regret, because when Smokey Robinson made the mistake of announcing from the stage, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, here in this audience is a man that I call Mr. Music. Ladies and gentlemen, Stevie Wonder." And so people, of course, I'd already seen him sitting in front of me. People literally trampled on my back just to touch Stevie Wonder. I left home in pain, but I didn't mind. Seriously, I mean, people went mad that Stevie Wonder was in the house and he was just sitting in the audience. So that, again, him I've seen 4 or 5 times at various venues around London. One of my favorite ever was Anita Baker.
Now you're talking.
Because she's one of my favorite singers ever. Yeah. And when she made her first visit to London, first concert was at the Hammersmith Odeon, as it was then. I literally had a front seat because I bought her album, because the album that she was promoting was Songstress. Right. But before then, she'd had her previous album, which, gosh, I can't believe it was on Beverly Glen, was the music label, It'll Come to Me. And that album had Angel and songs like that, which was, a big favorite. And so they announced that, tickets for Anita Baker. I went, and myself and my siblings, we all bought tickets, and we had front row seats, literally, because we were first in the queue for tickets. And so when she came out, I can remember she was actually wearing a pink satin dress. Oh. And there were gasps, not from the men, but from the women. I mean, they're like, "Oh my God, she's gorgeous." Audible, literally audible. And it was funny because everybody burst out laughing, because imagine a theater of 3,000 people gasping audibly, or 2,000 of them being women. It was really quite, and it wasn't planned. It was just at the sheer, and for me, it was one of those magic moments, because I liked the 2 albums that had come out. But if you were to ask me, name your top 10 singers of all time, one of my favorite singers would be Van Morrison, the Irish singer. I mean, he's one of the most soulful singers ever. And she started with a Van Morrison song, Moondowns. I couldn't believe it. I thought, I've died and gone to heaven. I could not believe it. Like, what? Anita Baker? And my sisters, they looked at me like, "Did you know?" I said, "No, I didn't know she was going to start with Moondowns." I mean, it's a fantastic song anyway. And she absolutely killed it. And brilliant. And so 4 days after the concert, she was doing a signing autograph session at Tower Records in Piccadilly, which was, Tower Records was still there in Piccadilly. And so I went along. At lunchtime, I was working in Westminster at the time. And when I got there, there was a crowd of about 500 people. And I thought, if I join this, by the time I get to meet Anita Baker, it'll probably be time to go home. So I went back to work. And then I came back after work to see if I could pick up any souvenirs, like posters and so on. And there was still a crowd of about 120 people. So obviously people had just been joining. So I looked and I said, is this for Anita Baker? And they were like, yeah, because they had a big sign there saying, Anita Baker signing ceremony. I thought, oh, okay. So I asked the guys at the door. They said, yeah, she's still here. She's been here for hours. Like, wow, okay. So I joined the queue. And I could see her there. She looked tired.
Yeah.
Sure. And so when it was my turn, they said, okay, come forward now. I went forward with my album and she was about to sign it. And I said, look, before you sign this, can I just say something? I said, your concert at Hammersmith. I said, and believe me, I've seen over 100 concerts. I've seen some of the biggest legends of soul music. Your concert blew them away. She jumped up and kissed me. I swear to God, I nearly died.
I'll check you that day. Really? Oh, she had so much spunk, didn't she?
And she was like, oh, and she said, oh my God, that is wonderful, that is wonderful. And she was so, giddy with, and so, and the album, I was married at the time. And so the album was signed to myself and my now ex-wife. And so she says, to Ade and Zain, much love to you always. Love, Anita Baker. I still have it, of course. Needless to say, I still have the album. But I went home and I told Zainab, and so it's like, yeah, I'm sure that's the only reason you went there, because you thought you'd get kissed by Anita Baker. But I mean, the guys behind me were like, you jammy sod.
I tell you, what did you say to her?
Well, that's what they were asking. And I told them, I said, look, I just said to her that her concert was the best I've seen from many a year. And it was true. She was amazing that night, and we did not want to let her go. And so, to me, that's music. I like, the one thing that I always complain about when I go to music concerts is that the DJs are always rubbish before the groups come on. And I always think, why doesn't somebody ask me to come and play some kind of complimentary music before? And the last time I remember that was when, about 5 years ago, Kassav, who are my favorite band of all time, played at Shepherd's Bush Odeon. And I went, and the DJ was playing music that was like rock music, and you're like, this is a crowd that's come for Zouk.
Yeah,
you can play kind of complimentary stuff, even if you don't play Zouk, play stuff. And I all the time I could think in my head about kind of music that I could play and so on. And mentioned earlier, my favorite country these days is Cape Verde. And it was music that kind of led me to Cape Verde. There's no two ways about it. I talked about it, and I mentioned how, Sarah Tavares kind of challenged me. Not challenged, she said to me, you loved Cape Verde so much, how many times have you been? And I said, I've never been. And she looked at me, incredulous, as you used the word in an earlier context. I said, no, honestly. And she said, what? She said, surely you have to go. And I said, look, I will go. I was called within 6 months of that meeting. I did go to Cape Verde.
And you've been a different man ever since, right?
Totally. If you can ever go to a place and it exceeds even your wildest dreams, I think going to Cape Verde has to be it. It's the only place I've gone to where I've had a vision of what it was like in a kind of anticipatory way. And it has far exceeded that in a way that's immeasurable. I mean, immeasurable. And every time I go and every time I've gone, it's always been better than the last time. Amazing place. It is, as you once said to me in a phone call, we talk about it like it's utopia. Trust me, it is utopia.
Well, this is the thing, Ade. I have to say, I cannot wait for lockdown to be over, because honestly, it has definitely jumped up my top 10 list.
And talk about the music, talk about the people who are warm and friendly and welcoming. Again, I related an instance where after 3 or 4 days, of being there, been paying with euros, with dollars, and with escudos, the local currency. Went to a restaurant, walking down 100 meters from the restaurant, the waiter comes running after me, and I'm thinking, I'm going to thump this guy because I remember paying. And he kind of whispers to me, my manager thinks you've overpaid.
Wow.
And I think your manager thinks what?
Wow.
He said, yes, perhaps you thought the bill was in euros, but actually that bill. And so they had what they said was my fair change. And of course, because I didn't think I'd been stiffed, I just said to them, keep it. But I can't think of another country in the world where that would happen, that they would actually run after me down the road. They might run after me if I hadn't paid, but to run after me because you think I'd overpaid, there's not a country I can think of that happening. And so, really warmed to the people. They warmed to me. They liked the fact that I tried to speak Portuguese. I didn't try the Criollo so much because that's the lingua franca, of course, but all I did was pick up a few slangs, really. And of course, their biggest and most popular slang is not even in either Portuguese and Criollo, it's in English, and it is no stress.
No stress. I remember you
they say it all the time, and you see it on graffiti on the walls everywhere, and people with T-shirts with "no stress" in English written.
And I
it's
guess
one
that's
phrase they've adapted.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's one of their secrets to the success story that Big is. They just have a completely different mindset that allows them to just focus on the right things. Education, education, education. I guess.
This is a country that's on the way to being the first country in the world, not in Africa, in the world, to be 100% reliant on renewable energy. They've announced it and they mean it. Now, that's quite a bold statement to make to the world that we are going to do it. And they're going to get there long before anybody else does.
Yeah.
And why? Because they're focused and they have a purpose.
Sure.
If you're from Africa and you go to Cape Verde, as I did, my first time there, as we were checking in at the hotel, the lights went off. And I remember laughing, thinking, okay, I am in Africa. I know I've heard all these things about Cape Verde. And then after about half an hour, the lights came on and there was a commotion outside in the streets. So I asked Samira, who was the receptionist, I said, what's going on? Are they announcing a dance or something? She said, no, it's the people from the electricity company. They're apologizing. I said, they're apologizing for half an hour light failure. I said, why? Don't you get that? She said, no, it's very infrequent. She said, I can't even remember the last time we had power cuts. And I'm like, what? In Africa? You guys are really not in Africa. Really? Here in Gambia, it happens on a good day 5 or 6 times a day. On a good day.
It's become the African story, hasn't it?
It has become that. So there are many, many reasons why people should go to Cape Verde. And again, I was saying to you, for somebody like myself who grew up in Sierra Leone, we have some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. I'm not going to go to Cape Verde for the beaches, beautiful though they are. I go for the music, for the culture. They have some of the artists, some sculptors who are on a world-class level. They are on a world-class level, no two ways about it. They have musicians. You could walk into any bar and hear music and you think, why is this guy not world famous? I swear, I'm not making this up. Of the highest standards, because they are people who believe in quality. So even in how they build their houses, unlike many African countries, you don't go to a house in Cape Verde and you struggle to close the window or you struggle to close the door. That's the norm here in Gambia, I'm sad to say. In Cape Verde, it would be a complete anomaly. You just see, because they really believe in quality, and so many things to commend it. Yeah.
Now, do you see why, Ade, I regard this place as utopia? Because it genuinely sounds like it should not be on planet Earth.
That's why I said it's another planet.
Beyond the mere mortals like you and I don't get to frequent. And
just quickly, I know we're trying to wrap up, but when the president of Sierra Leone went with the national team there, the guy who's the vice chancellor at the university in Cape Verde, he's a Sierra Leonean, Saidu Bangura. And he said, as the president was going around with the Sierra Leone football team, one of the ministers said to him, Salon, if we be serious, now so we say your country go down. Now, for those who don't know, he was saying if Sierra Leone was serious, that our country would be as good and as nice as Cape Verde. And he said it in hearing of everybody. And Saidi was taken aback because this was a government minister saying it. And when he was relating the tale to me, he said, I felt like saying to him, aren't you embarrassed saying this in front of your president? But that's the kind of place it is. People really need to check it out. And it's a wonderful place for sure.
Definitely. Ade, honestly, I mean, Cape Verde clearly deserves a session all by itself.
Totally. Its own program.
Huh?
Its own program, absolutely.
For sure. And, I feel like I've encroached on your time long enough. So yes. I would love to have you back on here at another time.
I'd love to come back on here. My staff have been standing at the door saying, why isn't he coming and editing the news?
My goodness, I feel terrible. Of course,
I don't know if you saw, one of them crept into shot at one point, and I had to shoo him away. Yes, quite.
To be honest, that was my cue. I realized that really, I need to just wrap this up. I could quite happily sit here for hours. We've had sessions on the phone where we've literally
of course.
non-stop, and there's still so much to talk about, which is
indeed
why I thought we'll bring you on here. So next time I would love to go into a little bit more about your other interests, the music, because I know that's something that we can discuss again.
The music, the architecture. Don't forget, next year there's a book coming out, The Architecture of Sub-Saharan Africa. I have 2 articles in there. One is about Cape Verde, one about Sierra Leone.
Yes. I would love to give a bit more information about that for sure.
Yeah.
And of course, there are a few other countries of significance, shall we say, on that great continent that
absolutely.
We would love to discuss a little bit more.
Sure.
So without further ado, just to say thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure. I mean, my favorite pastime other than listening to music is talking.
So, I would never have guessed.
Quite.
But this has been amazing. It almost feels like we've just scratched the surface. But
we really have, because even as I'm speaking to you, I'm just thinking, she doesn't know about this or that, but I won't even go there.
We'll save that for the next episode. How's that?
Absolutely, yeah. I won't go there, I promise. Yeah.
For sure.
Save it for the next one, yeah.
Wonderful. Ade, thank you so much.
Thank you, Simone. It's been a pleasure.
I will let you get back now to other pressing matters.
Yes.
And
before they hand me my notice here at QTV.
Indeed, I could see things being slipped from the left.
Quite exactly.
Oh dear, much obliged, and we'll speak soon.
All right. Thank you, and have a great day. Have a great evening. Yeah.
Definitely. I'll just
take care now.
Now.